Okay, morning everyone. It's really my pleasure here to have the sharing session with all of you. And today we carry on with our series of the labor ordinance in different countries in Asia. And today I'm very glad to share with you about the Hong Kong, okay? And before I start, I would like to introduce myself and also the HR community. Thereafter, I will share with you about the labor ordinance in Hong Kong. And throughout my sharing, I invite you to ask any questions. And then after that, we still have chance for some discussions if required, okay? So okay, so let me start it. My name is Rita Chui. I have been in the human resources field for over 20 years. And while I was working in the regional HR role, I was taking up this role. I had the pain of connecting and reaching out to my counterparts in Asia in order for me to finish some of my HR projects. That's why I just think that it's very important for our HR practitioners to connect and share with each other so that we can make our life easier and also with the aim of adding values to each other. So organizing these sharing sessions is one of the highlights of the HR community. And today, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to share on the Hong Kong labor law. Okay, and so if you have any question, maybe you can just unmute yourself or you can type your question and I will just answer it, okay? So I think recently there has been on the news about lots of happenings in Hong Kong, right? That has aroused or raised the awareness of the people over the world. So Hong Kong has become very famous now on the news, especially on lots of strikes and protests and so forth. But of course, it's nothing to do with the labor ordinance in Hong Kong. But I can tell you that Hong Kong is an international city with the aim of attracting investment from investors all over the world. So basically, the Hong Kong labor ordinance or Hong Kong labor law is very basic because it is not designed to give a lot of benefits to the employees. Otherwise, Hong Kong will not be attractive to investors. Okay, so today I'm going to go through with you the differences. I have the agenda of the day. Firstly, I will go through with you some of the employment-related legislations besides the labor ordinance. And then after that, it will be the basic employment conditions. And then we also will talk about the changes on the labor law in this year, and then after the challenges. Okay, let's go through the employment-related legislations in Hong Kong. Okay, so basically, later on we'll go through the employment ordinance, stipulating the basic conditions, basic employment conditions for the people in Hong Kong. And secondly, we have the employee compensation ordinance. What is it about? Basically, according to the law in Hong Kong, each of the employer is obliged to arrange employee compensation to the employees on their first day of joining the company. And under this employee compensation, employee actually is protected when they get injured, okay, during the course of employment. So basically, each employee has to do it on the first day of the employee joining the company, okay? And then after that, there will be employment opportunities ordinances, meaning that in Hong Kong, we focus a lot on equal opportunities, meaning that we employ someone or we hire someone, we promote someone just because of their knowledge or experience, but not because of their sex or their gender, not because of their ability, disability, or because of their family status, or even their race or their religion. So that's why we have to be very careful as HR practitioners in Hong Kong that when we hire someone, we really hire someone because of their, or not to hire someone because of the ability or the experience, but not because of the reasons that I just mentioned. Otherwise, the employer will very easily be sued by the prospective candidates for not being equal when they're given the chance to be considered for the employment. And so that's why in Hong Kong, there is very, when we advertise, okay, when we advertise an recruitment ad on a job portal, we are very careful not to mention their gender, their age, their family status, or even their religions or requirements in our job advertisement. So we cannot say that we hire somebody who needs to be a lady or a female or a male, or we cannot say that we hire somebody who needs to be single, or we cannot say that we can only hire someone who is a Christian, or we cannot say that we hire someone who is only a Chinese. Okay, so we cannot specify all this in our job advertisement. Otherwise, the prospective candidates will sue the company under these ordinances. And one thing very interesting is that when we, about this medical checkup, okay, I believe that a lot of companies will organize pre-employment checkup, right? Medical examination for the employees. In Hong Kong, because of all these ordinances, we dare not to organize, to arrange for it. Why does it say so? Because when we ask a prospective candidate to attend this kind of pre-employment medical examination, so after the examination, the doctor will write the report, right? And then the doctor will write whether he's fit for job, fit for the work or not. So because of this, then the employee, if at the end of the day, the prospective candidates get the report saying that he is not fit for the job, and then subsequently the employer withdrew their offer, then the prospective candidate can sue the company for withdrawing the offer because of this reason. Then the company has to come up with a lot of reason why they withdraw the offer. Because if the employer just say that, oh, because the doctor says that the prospective candidate is not fit for the job, then the employer has to provide a lot of evidence why he's not fit for the job. Even if I have a, say for example, hepatitis B, right? Something wrong with the liver, and um, let me mute the okay. So when the doctor report says that, oh, here's the hepatitis B, so it's not fit for the job, then the employer has to prove to the candidate, to the prospective candidate of the new hire to be that, why would that be not fit for the job because of this kind of illness? So it ends up of a lot of explanations and so forth. So in order to avoid this kind of hassles, a lot of companies in Hong Kong have started not to arrange for this kind of medical examinations to their prospective candidate, to their prospective new hire. Maybe as one of the conditions for them to work in the company. So because of this, it's very interesting, but in Hong Kong, a lot of companies have started not to arrange for it in order not to be sued or to avoid these kind of hassles. And then next ordinance would be the personal data privacy ordinance. In Hong Kong, data privacy is very, very strict. As for HR practitioner, if we collect, even when in a recruitment ad, we have to specify very clear at the bottom part of the recruitment ad that all the information collected is purely for employment purpose, meaning that we cannot, as employer, we cannot use the data for commercial purposes or to use the data to sell it to other companies for their promotion and so forth, because it's against the law. That's why we are all governed by this data privacy ordinance, and we also have to get the consent from the employees when we collect their data. Okay, and lastly would be the Mandatory Provident Fund Scheme Ordinance in Hong Kong. And this is the, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, that Hong Kong is a city whereby we want to attract as many investors as possible. That's why our benefits is minimal as compared to a lot of countries like in Europe or even in a lot of developing countries. So the only mandatory benefit requiring employer to do is this provident fund. Actually, is the retirement fund in Hong Kong. And maybe you have read a news about this retirement fund. This retirement fund, we have we have this, but the contribution made by the employer is very minimal. The maximum limit per month is only around, I think, 150 US dollar, which is around, I think, 1,500 Hong Kong dollars a month. Contribution made by the employer every month. You know, when you take into account the cost of living in Hong Kong, if somebody start working maybe at the age of 30, you know, at the time that they retire at age 65, how much would they get? After much calculation, we believe that the amount that they have accumulated in this under this provident fund scheme is not good enough for them to survive for their remaining life after the employment. And also, don't forget, the amount, the contribution made by the employer and the employee will be put under a scheme managed by the one of the service providers that we pick, and there is no guarantee return. So according to some of the result about our performance, about the fund performance, I think last year we got a loss. So meaning that our retirement under this scheme will be diminished because of the wrong choice that we made on the investment fund. Okay, and I heard that in countries such as Singapore, right? Because I was working in Singapore for some time as well. The government basically managed the fund, and they will guarantee the return for the employees. But in Hong Kong, we don't have this luxury. That's why people in Hong Kong really have to rely on themselves on everything. We cannot rely on the government on providing this kind of, not to mention the only benefit, the only monetary benefits that we have, that is retirement fund. But the performance, we can always get a negative return from this fund investment. So that's why it might connected to what is happening recently about the strikes and demonstrations and so forth, is also because we have a lot of social problems, such as the retirement problems, housing problems, a lot of medical issues and so forth. That has prompted people to walk on the streets saying that they are against it, they don't really happy with the government and so forth. So it's a combination of different issues. Of course, they say that, okay, now because of this expansion law, that's why the people are actually fighting against it. But in reality, behind the scene, there are a lot of grievances as well. Okay, so let's move on to, on this one, any questions so far? If any question, you can type on your chat, in the chat group, and I will just stop, and then or you can unmute yourself for any questions. But I think it's good to have some discussions, because I believe that some countries will have similar ordinances, right? And this is the things that we have in Hong Kong, and so that would be the things I would like to share with you about these employment-related legislations. Okay, so if no question on this slide, I will move on to the next one, which is the basic employment conditions in Hong Kong. So you can see from here that not much actually. In Hong Kong, the employment law is not really on the strong side of the protection of the employees, okay? So for working hours, for those who are at the age of 18 or above, there is no limitations on their work hours, meaning that we can work very long hours till midnight every day. But for those who are at the age of 15 or below, because in Hong Kong, even students, they can work part-time. So, but the limitation is that for those between the age of 13 to 15, they could not work at any industrial related business. Okay, that means they cannot work in that kind of area and so forth. And then for those who are at the age of between 15 to 17, they can work in those industries, but there's limitations on their work hours. They can only work 8 hours a day with a limit of 48 hours in a week, okay? But for those who work, who are at the age of 18 or above, there's no limitations on the work hours. Okay, okay, so got it. So and as we come to the paid holidays, the statutory one is the statutory holiday is 12 days. But basically is for the blue collar, and for well, most of cases for office workers, we enjoy bank holidays. Bank holidays basically are 17 days in a year, okay? But for those who work in the blue collar, because usually companies will grant only 12 days to blue collar staff. And but of course, the employer can do better by giving them bank holidays, which would be 17 days in a year, okay? So after that would be the paid leave in Hong Kong. So we have the annual leave paid starting at 7 days for the first year of service, and then also 7 days for the second years of service, and then thereafter 1 more day for another years of service, up to a maximum of 14 days. Okay, and then for paid sick leave, in Hong Kong, basically we can accumulate a sick leave up to a maximum 120. So meaning that on the first year, when we have joined the company, for every completed 1 month of service, we can accumulate 2 days of sick leave. And that means for the first year, it will be 24 days, right? For the second year, for every 1 month of service, we can get 4 days of leave entitlement. So for the starting the second year would be 48 days. So here we accumulate up to 120 years, but the pay is only 80%. But we is only under the condition that if we take a consecutive 4 days of sick leave, supported by a doctor's certificate, then we can get 80% pay from the employer. If we have accumulated 120 days, but we only take 1 day sick leave, then we won't get any pay according to this, according to the labor ordinance. Only if we take 4 days in a row, supported by doctor certificates, then we can enjoy this 80% pay. Okay, and as for maternity, we can enjoy 10 weeks with 80% pay. And here I did not show the paternity leave. And recently the government has also granted paternity leave of up to 5 days with 80% pay to employees, okay, to the male employees. And then in Hong Kong, we don't have any parental leave or carer leave. That's all for the leave that we have in Hong Kong. And then we don't have any union. We don't have any collective bargaining. And of course, there is, if we dismiss somebody without a cause, then the employer would be sued by the employee for unreasonable or unfair dismissal. Okay, and then we also have the minimum wage, which is around 35.5 Hong Kong dollars per hour. Okay. And then for unemployment insurance, we don't have that. As I mentioned at the very first beginning, the only mandatory insurance that we have is the employee compensation, and the only mandatory benefit from the as stipulated by the government is the MPF, which is the retirement scheme in Hong Kong. Okay, so any questions on these employment conditions here? And there is a message from our members that we'll talk about termination. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Okay. Okay, talk about the severance, termination, pregnancy, maternity leave, average. Okay, so okay, so about this severance. Okay, in Hong Kong, basically, if we have worked as employee, we have worked for a company for 2 years, and the company would like to eliminate some of the jobs, then employees are eligible for redundancy payment, which is at a maximum of 15,000 Hong Kong dollars multiplied by the years of service of the employee with the company. That is the redundancy payment compensation. And the employer has to prove that they are going to downsize or eliminate some of the positions. And the employees working for the company for 2 years, then or more, then they're eligible for this redundancy payment. And in Hong Kong, besides the redundancy payment, we also have another long service payment, meaning that if an employee has worked for a company for 5 years or above, and they have leave the company, resign from the company due to illness, or due to the fact that they retire, and also, and if they are dismissed by the company but not under summary dismissal, then they're eligible for long service payment, and the computation is same as the redundancy payment, meaning that 15,000 Hong Kong dollars as the maximum of the base. If your salary is less than that, then it will be on a actual basis. But if your salary actually is your basic salary multiplied by 2/3, but with a limit of 15,000. That's why if your salary is 30,000 per month in Hong Kong, and we multiply 2/3, which is more than 15,000 Hong Kong dollars, right? So we just use 15,000 Hong Kong dollars as the base, and then multiply by your years of service to come up with the compensation amount that you can get. But one thing, don't forget, is that in Hong Kong, this is the funny thing, the compensation might not be paid by the employer directly from their own pocket. Why did I say so? Because the employer can use their contribution that they made into the Provident Fund scheme, that is the retirement fund, to offset the compensation that they have to pay to the employees under redundancy or long service. So this is something that we are still under discussion in Hong Kong, because we believe that our retirement fund is for our retirement, but under the current legislations, the employer can offset this compensation that they give to the employees due to redundancy or non-service by using the employer contribution that they made into the retirement fund. So basically, we get the compensation from our own money under this retirement scheme. It's a bit interesting, right? I don't believe that other countries will have this kind of arrangement, but in Hong Kong, we do have that. That it also shows that the government really wants to attract as many investors as possible, so that they made a lot of things are very favorable to employers, but not to the employees. Even for our retirement fund, employers can use their contribution to offset our compensation. Okay, so question here. Okay, so about severance, we talked about that. Termination, yes. In Hong Kong, we can terminate employees. I think it's not as difficult as in China or Vietnam, okay? In Hong Kong, we can terminate anyone as long as we give them sufficient compensation. Why did I say so? Okay, if we sign somebody who is not performing well, okay? And so there's no such rule under the labor ordinance that we have to give a very good reason to terminate them and so forth. Instead, when we find somebody who is not performing very well, we just tell them that, okay, you're not performing well. Hang on, let me adjust the maybe the new participants. Can you put yourself to the mute mode so that we will not be hearing the background noise? Thank you. So if we find the employee no good, the employer basically can just serve the notice to the employee saying that, okay, we find your performance no good, and here's your compensation. And as long as the employer can give sufficient compensation to the employee can go, and the employee will not sue. There's no ground to sue the company, unless the employee finds that the compensation that they get from the company is not in accordance with the law. Okay, Mr. Bamban, my friend, has joined us. Okay, and I just mute you because of background noise. Okay, So here's the termination about the employees in Hong Kong. And recently, actually, I was representing my employers to handle one case about employee termination, and that gave me very deep impression on a statement made by the judge. He said that in Hong Kong, there is no such law telling you that you will have life employment. As long as the employer has compensated you enough, then they have already done in accordance with the law. There's no lifetime employment in Hong Kong. Even if they find you not doing well and they need to let you go, then if they compensate you in accordance with the law, then that's it. An employee had no right to sue the employer for anything, for not giving them sufficient time for training, to rectify the situation and so forth. Of course, this is not the practice of a good employer, but at the law level, we don't have this kind of requirements. As long as you let the staff know that, okay, we don't require your service, and this is your notice period. We either give you sufficient notice for you to serve your notice, or we either make payment in lieu of the notice, give you sufficient compensation, pay you for any untaken annual leave and so forth. Then that's the end of your employment with your employer in Hong Kong. Yeah. And then there's a question about the definition of sufficient compensation. Okay, so when we terminate somebody, okay, in Hong Kong, we have to pay them any the salary, okay, their salary that's up to the last working day. We calculate up to the last working day. Besides the salary, any untaken earned but untaken annual leave, and also the any compensation, meaning that if this is a redundancy, then we have to pay the redundancy. If it's not redundancy, it's not something not related to long service payment, and that's all for the compensation. And we need to serve them the notice, right? If if the company would like to give them payment in lieu of notice, then we have to pay them this part of payment in lieu of notice. Then other than that, that's all for the compensation. And then there's a formula, yes, and I mentioned earlier for redundancy, a maximum amount of 15,000 Hong Kong dollars as the base, and then multiply by their years of service as the formula. For redundancy, also the formula for long service payment. Then how about employees who are on prolonged illness for critical illness? Yes, we cannot terminate. Very good question. We cannot terminate those who are on sick leave, who are on prolonged illness for critical illness. We cannot terminate someone who have joined any trade union. In Hong Kong, we only have trade union for very big companies such as MTR. And apart from that, basically 90% of the employees do not join any trade union because we don't have this kind of legislation, and also it's not that common to join trade unions in Hong Kong. And also when somebody who is somebody who's pregnant, we cannot terminate them as well. So here are the information, here are the situation whereby we can or we cannot terminate someone, okay, in Hong Kong. So any other questions besides the one that I just answered? Okay, if no, I will carry on with the changes in the employment laws in Hong Kong. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, starting May this year, we have adjusted the minimum wage from 34.5 Hong Kong dollars to 37.5 Hong Kong dollars. Okay, and then we have also increased the maternity leave to 5 days. And also and also in Hong Kong, okay, when we also follow some of the precedents of the court cases. And there is a court case last year about this unlawful dismissal. When it's talking about unlawful dismissal, meaning that we dismiss somebody when he or she is on this sick leave, when she is being pregnant, or when yeah, for this kind of reason, we call it unlawful dismissal. We should not dismiss or terminate someone under that kind of situation. If the employer does it, then we consider as unlawful dismissal. Okay, so if someone has unlawfully dismissed an employee, and the employee can make a claims for reinstatement or re-engagement, and the labor tribunal may make an order for such reinstatement or re-engagement without the need to secure the employer's agreement. That means the court has the right to reinstate someone if they find out that this employee is unlawfully dismissed. Okay? And then also there's penalty for some of the unlawful dismissal. Say, for example, 3 times of the employee's average monthly wages are subject to a ceiling of penalties 72,500. Okay, so if employee is on prolonged sickness beyond sick leaves entitled, can we stop pay and hire a backfill? Yes, we can. We can stop paying that person. When I mentioned earlier that, right, the maximum days that we can accumulate as our sick leave entitlement is 120. So once the employee has used up this entitlement, the companies can stop paying them and hire backfill. Yes, this is allowable by the law, but we cannot fire or terminate the employment of this employee. If we do it, that is considered as unlawful dismissal. Okay, and I could remember that when I was working for German companies in Hong Kong, and we do have cases whereby employees were on prolonged sickness. The company actually paid them beyond the 120 days on a foot at 100% of her salary. So this is the law, but I believe that a lot of companies can do better in order to retain talents, right? Okay, so let's move on to the challenges about the employment law in Hong Kong. Okay, we talked about this retirement fund, right? So there's a lot of noises in the market saying that we should abolish this kind of offsetting arrangement, because the idea of having a retirement fund is to get enough money for the employees in Hong Kong at the age of 65 to enjoy their retirement life, right? But somehow this arrangement has diminished the amount that we will get at the time at the time of our retirement. That's why there are a lot of noises in the market saying that, okay, we need to abolish this kind of offsetting arrangement. And I believe this kind of offsetting arrangement would only happen in Hong Kong. But the government is more listen to the employers. As I mentioned earlier, that we really want to attract more investment, right? So the employer has bigger saying than the employees. So this is still under discussion as to whether this arrangement can be abolished successful in the end. The government did come up suggestion that, okay, for this kind of offsetting arrangement, the government may pay for it. Okay, so basically the government will pay for part of this compensation to be paid to the employee from this retirement fund, but still under discussion, so that's a very interesting topic. As employee, of course, we don't want we don't want our money to be diminished by allowing the employer to offset the amount that we should get from this scheme, but this is the law in Hong Kong. Okay, and also there is a proposal on passing laws on standard working hours. In Hong Kong, we work very long hours without, we are at the age of 18 or above, without any limitations. So for work-life balance, we basically, we want the government to pass such a law. But again, there are a lot of noises in the market saying that, oh, why? Because people in Hong Kong are used to long hours. Why do we need to pass a law on that to limit the work hours? That will affect the productivity and efficiency of the people in Hong Kong. So this law is still under discussion. And then there is a proposal on increasing maternity leave from 10 weeks to 14 weeks. I think this one will be easier because it's only for the benefits of employees, and some app companies are willing to pay, and also the pay is only 80%, not 100%. And also potential changes to the discrimination ordinances, because the discrimination ordinances basically actually has a lot of impacts to the employments of our people in Hong Kong. We are against this discrimination, and we need to have express provisions to prohibit any direct or indirect discrimination, like on grounds of breastfeeding, prohibiting the racial discrimination and harassment by interpretation and so forth. So basically, we want to make it in an express manner that we are against this kind of discrimination. Okay, so let me see the questions. Okay, so how about the staff? How about the staff admission hospital? If we deduct from sick leave or, okay. For staff admission hospital, a lot of companies in Hong Kong have the medical insurance scheme, which is not mandatory. But as I mentioned, we want to retain good employees, right? So we need to decide and also offer very good benefits to employees. So if the staff is admitted to the hospital, it's considered as the sick leave, and of course we deduct it from their total sick leave entitlement. Yes. We don't have hospitalization leave. It's still part of this sick leave. So we lump everything together as sick leave. We don't have hospitalization leave, and we don't have this kind of specific name. We just lump everything together as the sick leave. Okay, and then it has overtime. Yes, we long work hours in Hong Kong, but we don't have mandatory overtime pay. But we do have the minimum wage, right? So we as HR, practitioner, we have to be very careful when employee work long hours, because when you look at earned hours and their record on it, after spending so many hours on one day, it's still in compliance with the minimum wage, especially for those salary is not that high. If they work long hours and you don't give them compensation, so the company will stand at the risk of paying them below the minimum wage because of long hours. So on that, HR practitioners have to be very careful not to be caught in this minimum wage ordinance while the employee work long hours. And then we have a question, is there any standard social security amount? No, we don't. As I mentioned, we don't have any social security for employment. And the only mandatory benefits from the government is the retirement fund, but still a lot of loopholes in a lot of areas for improvement. I should put it this way, especially on this offsetting arrangement. Yeah. So maybe now I think that's all for my sharing today. And now I would like to open this floor for discussions, so that we can know better about the law in Hong Kong. And I'm going to put everybody on the unmute mode so that everybody can spit out your questions. Okay, so any questions from the floor? Anybody? Anybody?
Rita.
Yes, my friend.
Rita,
Yes.
do you have a policy from the government that employee can have a flexible working scheme like in Philippines? In Philippines, employee can work in different company, but in our country still not. So how about in Hong Kong?
Okay, according to the labor ordinance in Hong Kong, they don't have this kind of guidance. But companies in Hong Kong have started to adopt these flexi hours. But it all depends on their business nature. Say for example, in shipping, okay, because I used to work in the shipping company, like Maersk, they allow them to work from home. Basically, they don't need them to work from in the office because of the high rental in Hong Kong. And as long as they can deliver their job, they don't really care how long they work and where they work. So companies in Hong Kong have started to, actually some of them, especially big companies, have adopted this flexi hours. In HSBC, okay, in Hong Kong, they have also adopted this kind of flexi hours. So they don't care how many hours you work. They don't really care about these places that you work. But for some companies, they adopt flexi hours, but they still think that during these core hours they need to be there. Apart from that, they can arrive early or they can arrive late to the office. So it depends on the company policy, but there is no mandatory policy in Hong Kong for this kind of flexi working hours.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So any other questions from our friends? So basically, the labor ordinance in Hong Kong is not complicated, and it's very easy, even for the HR practitioners. I think when you compare the one in Hong Kong, in China, Vietnam, or even Indonesia or Philippines, I believe they are more they are more sophisticated. And Hong Kong labor law ordinance is very straightforward because basically they don't provide a lot, especially when it comes to termination. Um, when you pay them, adequately, then you can let them go. That's so simple in Hong Kong. That's why you might have the impression that Hong Kong people work very hard because we believe that we have to rely on ourselves to earn a living. We cannot rely on an employer. We cannot rely on the government. That's why we work long hours, and that's our life. And because of the legislations, because of the environment. Yeah. So, are there any other questions, like from Mr. Baban? Baban, my friend, any question from your side? All right, very quiet. If no other questions, then I will just conclude the session today. And I'm going to I'm recording this session, and I will organize a watch party whereby for those who have not attended this session can also watch it, and then have a basic idea on what the labor ordinance is like in Hong Kong. Okay, so that's all for today, and thanks for attending it, and have a very nice
Thank
weekend.
you,
All
Rita.
my friends. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye
you.
bye. Thanks. Bye bye.